Yeah. Well, the theme of the Enlightenment being singular and global, I'll start with the prospectus to our gathering, which speaks of non-European perspectives. Yes. And the prospectus also speaks of Enlightenment values. Now, I will be guided by these two matters, if somewhat expansively and in my own way, by the proposal of perspectivism, in my case, perspectivism light, in discussing the character, scale, dimensions of the Enlightenment. And I will also recognize the issue of normativity in the definition, and again, with regard to the scale of the phenomena that we recognize as the Enlightenment. I will suggest that we need to add a sense of reality and the sobering perspective of history if we did not wish to yield to the ever importunate presence of nihilistic perspectivism. Like its correlates, modernity and secularism, the Enlightenment is not, after all, an inventory of features that might or might not be found where one may happen to be looking. It is a process, a variable constellation of ideas, habituses, practices, institutions, instantiated by human agency. Kant is, of course, the presiding spirit over our meeting today, and it might be said at the outset that his interest in the French Revolution, among many other things outside of Königsberg, indicates clearly his keen alertness to the Enlightenment's worldliness. When Kant, in his idea of a universal history, spoke of unsocial sociability and of social union as a, and I quote, pathologically enforced social union, acting against nature, he gives due recognition to the fact that culture is indeed action against nature and in violation of nature, and that it is reason which is the agent enabling us to extend our remit beyond nature's dictates and to extend them boundlessly. Without the challenge of unsalutary qualities, in other words, without politics, humans would forever remain little different, and this is Kant again, from the sheep that they had originally tended. Altogether, this matches my central proposition that no act may be adjudged pure enlightenment, and that this historical phenomenon is never consummate, never complete, never simple, and that criticism from imperfection is beside the point. For all the talk about the perfectibility of man, enlightenment is ever alloyed and never perfect and never pure, always in context, practiced with various combinations of determination and hesitancy, and with much ambiguity and ambivalence. The Enlightenment is not only Kant and Diderot, but it is also, crucially, Robespierre, Saint-Just, Toussaint Louverture, no less than Napoleonic armies in Rome, and Simon Bolivar's army in Latin America, or indeed King Amanullah in Afghanistan, or Senghor in Senegal a century later. It was not only the elaboration of reason and science, but the effect of correlative institutions, such as the Lycée or the Humboldtian University, patronized by the Prussian monarchy. And let me forestall any misunderstanding or ambiguity when I speak of Enlightenment singularity. I am not suggesting that the Enlightenment might be uniformly the unsullied espousal of the rights of the citizen as against bondage of a subject, the assimilation of the view that the past is a foreign country and the future is a space of progress and improvement, or the immaculate valuation of reason and science against superstition. As I mentioned science, I should also say that I use the word without inverted commas to mean a form of cognition deliberately acquired of a definable field of objects on common criteria that transcend propositional dispositions of an individual or of the knowing subject's social or herd instincts. One might recall Kant's characterization of reason as a faculty which enables extension beyond the limits of natural instinct. Now, by extension, the recognizable features of the Enlightenment just mentioned yield positivism as a doctrine of science and of history. They yield utilitarianism, secularism, evolutionism, Darwinism, and much more. These have come to prevail in various combinations, not simply by force of the truth finally revealed, nor by sheer loftiness and benevolence. The Enlightenment can hardly be separated from practices implying, more decisively, tempers, moods, sensibilities, loves and hatreds, wedded to social and political forces in conflict and in concord. These were effective not by the use of sweet reason alone, but through sheer force, energy, and hegemony of practices and agents. To mention some actors, we have sundry revolutionaries, including Jacobins, sections of the bourgeoisie, and what the Germans call, some of them with horror, the Bildungsbürgertum, Marxists, Republicans, the majority of French Freemasons, various enlightened despots, such as Joseph II of Austria, the reforming Ottoman state, or Frederick in Sanssouci down the road, on whom Kant once pinned his hopes. Especially salient have been most movements of national liberation, most fully that of Mustafa Kemal Atatürk in Turkey, who combined republicanism, secularism, and nationalism. All had transformative consequences and implications. The common simplification of the Enlightenment and its reduction to formulaic reiterations had, incidentally, been originally the work of Catholics and Royalists, constructing a polemical object across Europe prior to 1789, used emblematically the term Lumière to lend a name and description to fears of sinister intent, regicide, anarchy, and the annihilation of morality and of religion. It has been used similarly since, later aided and abetted by the cruder versions of secularism, positivism in the 19th century, and is an especially common motif among reactionaries, postmodernists, and postcolonialists worldwide today. One might add that, for all that has been claimed after the Cold War, liberalism has hardly been an agent of the Enlightenment. Cold War Atlanticist liberalism tended to be conservative, by instinct, and pessimistic. If anything, the German Democratic Republic was more greatly and centrally concerned with the Enlightenment than the Federal Republic ever was. The appropriation of the Enlightenment for liberalism and neoliberalism since 1989 has been covetous, implicated in various measures as the United States brought the splendor of light to Iraq and elsewhere of the past half century. Now, let's take this a little step further. Enlightenment cosmopolitanism, when evident, has always had been moored to a point of vantage and advantage, and is really a projection of hegemony by the metropolitan imperial instance. Writing on the delights of leisure 2,000 years ago, Seneca held that there were two commonwealths. One was, and I quote, a vast and truly common state, which embraces alike gods and men, in which you look neither to this corner of the earth nor to that, but measure the bounds of our citizenship by the path of the sun. The other is the one which we have been assigned to by accident of birth. Now, of course, the former afforded capacities for inquiry into universal themes of interest to the Roman literati, on virtue, beauty, whether or not God was active, and so on. Now, not dissimilarly, the Enlightenment spread and took root in a world transformed by the motive force of European capitalism and is premised on European modernity. It is in its recognizable form of ideas and practices of European vintage, but has become universal, appropriated, assimilated, produced, recast, and reproduced locally around the globe. The motifs, concepts, and writings of Diderot, for instance, or others, and the writings of later figures were circulated, translated, matched, developed further by intellectuals and political actors in Turkish, Arabic, Japanese, Chinese, Korean, Spanish, many other languages, with English and French remaining for long the favored linguistic media of Africa and of South Asia. It was nevertheless in Europe that these found critical mass and acquired the propulsive energy, propulsive cultural energy, made possible by expansive capitalism. In this sense, the bluster about Europe's distinctiveness in the age of modernity is not groundless, for all its smugness and hyperbole. it would not be amiss here to mention an open letter by Auguste Comte to Reshid Pasha, the Ottoman Prime Minister, in 1853, published in the front of his Système de politique positive, in which he declared that the empire, the Ottoman Empire, had become a laboratory of positivist philosophy, and that he and the chief minister were together embarked on parallel tracks in combating superstition. If one were to write a history of Arab political social thought over the past 2 centuries, one would find that its vertical hinge and constitutive motif and the locus of its internal disagreements and controversies amongst liberals, authoritarians, nationalists, and Marxists is the problematic of historical backwardness. Using this term, yeah, and the solicitation of progress. The same applies to Islamic or Islamist apologetics. In this sense, the Enlightenment is at once global and singular. It is, as Aimé Césaire would have it, a universal enriched by particulars. Yet for all the evident geographical and chronological variety, its equally evident singularity is also much contested. Alongside nativist repudiation of the Enlightenment on account of alleged connections with historical malevolence, we heard quite a lot about this morning, we have also its contestation by multiplication. Now, by this I mean the huge body of propositions that the Enlightenment is neither European nor necessarily secularist, but that it is plural. It is proposed that there is a Muslim Enlightenment, for instance, which defines the Enlightenment in certain regions of the world in the 18th century, and that the Enlightenment was produced in a regime of global synchronicity where each region deployed its own cultural resources without necessary convergences. The late David Graeber, who will be known to many of you, even wrote an entire book arguing that the Enlightenment, and especially the idea of human liberation, could not, after all, be called European at all, and that what he called its constitutively conversational form grew not only out of Parisian salons and coffee houses, but also from the loquacity of pirate commonwealths in the Indian Ocean. There is no doubt that various forms of exchange were instrumental in formulating some of the ideas and dynamics associated with the Enlightenment. The Islamophilia, not very well known, the Islamophilia of many radical Protestants and 17th century libertines and deists was a potent element in the polemic against superstition. So also was the transmission to the Netherlands by Iberian Jews and conversos of medieval Arabic historical critiques of the Gospels and of the Old Testament. But the crucial element in any conception of the Enlightenment is not what antiquarian delights or identitarian mileage might be had from bickering over who did what first, but the historical critical mass established at certain times and places. Now, note that the separation out of superstition from religion was to become a not inconsiderable cultural and a cognitive effort and asset, conducted in Chinese, in Japanese, Korean, Arabic, Thai, and Turkish, and in English in India and Sri Lanka, as well as Dutch in Indonesia. The language of the Enlightenment had become an established framework of universal exchange, generating resonances between otherwise disparate locations. But none of what has been said implies a degree of plasticity which would allow all and sundry to be placed under the Enlightenment canopy. Much has been said in recent decades about religious enlightenments, and much has been said about religion as an iteration of the Enlightenment, a Catholic Enlightenment, a Muslim Enlightenment, and so on. There seems to be a sleight of hand whereby religion in the age of Enlightenment is made to seem an integral part of the phenomenon, becoming enlightened religion. To my mind, speaking of this is like speaking of a yellow logarithm, you see. This has a scattering effect on the concept itself. It undermines its cogency and utility. It deprives it of analytical sense as it conflates naming, concept, and instance. This is quite apart from the fact that the Enlightenment is defined constitutively in opposition to superstition and is incompatible with religion. One might recall Kant's contention that religious immaturity was the most pernicious of immaturity's forms. One might argue for an exception in the case of a certain milieu of liberal German Protestants at the end of the 19th century, but overall, religious reactions to the effects of the Enlightenment have been parrying at varying distances. Otherwise, there has been hostility, and the ideological signature this has always had is at the end that of the anti-Enlightenment, which I have said had an important part in defining the enemy by identifying its distinctive features. Briefly stated, this has been a powerful historical current, first in Europe, later globally, propounding a romantic conception of society and of history, constituted by ideas of fastness, internal coherence, and permanence, where human characteristics are conceived as organic entities, biological. I might mention some luminaries. The intense Germans, Hamann and Herder, of course, a much more complex character, locked in combat, some kind of combat with Kant, at a particular point in time. Edmund Burke, the Irishman, the haughtily eloquent Joseph de Maistre, Dostoevsky, a century later, Maurice Barrès and Charles Maurras, assorted Nazis and fascists and historians. And also Indians, Golwalkar and Savarkar, and Maududi, and of course Sayyid Qutb, the paradigmatic theorist of political Islamism. Inevitably, Enlightenment and anti-Enlightenment moved cyclically. The first wave around the time of the French Revolution, the second around 1848, the third following 1870, the fourth after the Bolshevik Revolution, culminating in National Socialism, fascism, phalangism, Hindu nationalism, and political Islamism. The fifth came with the end of the Cold War and following the Iranian Revolution, with the rise of identity politics as an international koine, a time marked by Islamism, fashion neoliberalism of various descriptions, Hindu and Buddhist fundamentalism, a huge surge in the incidence of religion overall, and of apologies for religion, including attempts to see in secularism an historical trend with roots in Christianity, and to spot the Enlightenment in Islam and Catholicism. Now, nativism and postcolonialism are part of this regressive package. For postcolonialism is parasitic on anti-colonialism. It experiences revolution in the order of worlds as radical revolutions in the order of things. Movements of national liberation were modernist, using nativism, without doubt, rhetorically, with no claims that uniqueness trumps universality. And though Enlightenment modernism of movements of national liberation was born in circumstances of asymmetry, marginalizing or obliterating local cosmologies, whatever this may have been, one might say that this is perhaps a collateral benefit to some societies, an act of the List der Vernunft. I cannot speak now of what is being given the barbarous name epistemicide, and I will defer to Aimé Césaire and Hontunji on folk philosophies, and to many other writings in English and Arabic and other languages as well on various domains in which nativism purports to be an anti-colonial vox populi. I will just now wind down and close on a rather bleak note. Anti-Enlightenment motifs have become, since 1989, have become hegemonic in many places. And where they haven't, societies have become markedly cleft, as in the United States, for instance. Romantic identitarian tribalism marks this fifth wave, conceived and weaponized as a generic conflict of the biological order, where otherness is posited so acutely so as to be irreducibly ontological, such that some collectivities come to be what Carl Schmitt, with reference to Jews, characterized as others, and I quote, in an especially intensive sense. Now, such irreducible biologization of human communities correlates with the ethnopolitical Manichaeism one has been witnessing in Germany recently, most particularly after October 7th last year. the horrors of October 7th are posited as an irreducible beginning, without history, ascribed generally to ethnologically identifiable propensities. Whatever does not bend to this posture tends to be categorized as anti-Semitism, a stigmatizing label now expanded exorbitantly at will to such an extent that it actually undermines and demeans the significance and the victims of the Shoah, lending an air of crying wolf as what is going around all the time. There is an intense curtailment of the right to free expression, conjoined with active repression by the state, having imposed a regime characterized by two moves, one of silence and the other one of a formulaic repetition of a number of standard terms. The Germans have a wonderful word for this. It's a Gleichschaltung. Now,
the Nazi word, for those of you who don't understand German.
This is not a geschaltete country, but in this particular domain, there is clearly a Gleichschaltung. And there is something very similar with questions with the question of Eastern Europe as well. Anyway, this is expressed by words and actions of the highest instances of state and of the intelligentsia, putting aside for now the craven and egregiously unprofessional press, with a piece to Staatsräson as a Schmittian state of exception, most likely contravening the provisions of the Constitution. The federal president Steinmeier referred, and I quote, "the people of Palestinian and Arab roots here in Germany." Jürgen Habermas, in a vile and incoherent statement on Gaza, spoke somewhat more obliquely but clearly enough of, and I quote, "those in our country who have cultivated anti-Semitic sentiments." Note, our country seems not to be that of Arab citizens of Germany, or to cover them with sufficient clarity to convince others, in other words, in an especially intensive sense. The discourse pragmatics of both statements are unambiguous. And in a speech on the 22nd of April, 2024, the Chancellor spoke at length of Kant, proposing basically to enlist the sage of Königsberg to the coalition's epical switch to incipient militarism. Scholz's long peroration on the misfortunes of war in Eastern Europe makes mention of Gaza once as a place, and I quote, and this is the official translation, where shots are fired. Now, this to my mind sounds even more derisory than the German offer of helmets to Ukraine in February 2022. Clearly, philo-Semitism has come to be conjoined with a toxic xenophobia directed at Palestinians, Arabs, and by extension of an older cliché, of Muslims altogether. Intractable to reason. And this is what makes it relevant to our discussion of the Enlightenment. Underlying all of this, and this is the last thing I will say, is this is a quotation from Victor Klemperer's wonderful book on Lingua Tertii Imperii. Underlying this is and I quote, personalizing an allegorical singular, here identified as October 7th and Palestinians, moved, it is alleged, by hatred. Hatred, again according to Klemperer, is an irreducible sentiment, an autonomous and ontological evil with neither beginning nor end, and it has no cause. And throughout, there is a persistent horror in Germany of what is generally known as relativization. Now, to my mind, this is a foreboding word, as used, that betokens perturbation at the very possibility of reflection upon word, sense, and reference when it comes to the Shoah and the war on Palestine and the Palestinians. This is a political position of communicative closure, once again with reference to Habermas, of communicative closure, a willful derangement of reason that in this domain disavows the capacity to reflect and to reason and to reach moral judgment. And this is the final thing I will say, that all of the situation pushes the boundaries of any way in which you can reflect upon the meaning of moral courage and of moral judgment, of pusillanimity and of engagement. Thank you very much.
We'll be taking question answers, and we have kind of 15 minutes. That is generally. No, we don't.
No, we have a lot of a 10-minute break.
Okay.
So that gives us 20 minutes for discussion.
20 minutes. Okay. Good.
Wait for the mic, however.
Wait. Yeah. So
Would you like me to stay here, or shall I go to the...
Whatever is more comfortable for you.
Please. Ben, Susan, anybody else? Okay, Ben.
Thank you. I had 3 quick questions, 2 of which relate to the early part of the talk and 1 to the end. The first 2, you had a long list of abstractions as agents, and one of them which you didn't mention is Romanticism, because I thought this might be a relevant thing in a genealogy, especially leading to nationalism. So I wonder where you would place that. And the other is when you say cosmopolitanism, I think very often today we confuse the author of a model of cosmopolitanism with the implications of the model of cosmopolitanism, and I'm wondering if that's a potential problem. And towards the end, when we are talking about contemporary politics in Germany, I wonder whether we have a model to explain why ethnic minorities, people of color, people of Iranian or Arab origin, have actually expressed an interest in voting for the AfD.
That's a very good question.
Do you want to take another question?
It's entirely up to you. I don't know how do you want to do it.
Those are 3 questions at once, please.
Yeah,
Let
okay.
him answer them.
Okay. Okay, right, sorry, I misunderstood. Right, Romanticism is crucial. Romanticism is crucial to the formation of a particular notion of society, a particular notion of time, a particular notion of the relationship between internal coherence, the internal coherence of social collectivities, and of time, which is crucial to the formation of various kinds of nationalisms and populisms and indeed, there's a whole range of political possibilities there. But one of the edges is fascism and National Socialism, clearly, because the idea is to conceive. This is a metaphor which is organismic metaphors, which are very plentiful in this. That nations rise and fall and die and are revived, and renaissances and resurgences and so on. The whole organismic vocabulary is actually modeled upon biology, and one of those who used it very, very plentifully, of course, was Herder, and Herder has been enormously influential. Gadamer's work on Herder, which he wrote during the Second World War and then edited out quite a number of things after, is really quite an indication of precisely how a particular conception of history, that is to say of history as a process of organic and organismic growth, and that any serious change is really a form of contamination, right? I mean, this language is much more, it is so common that people actually notice it little, because it is really so common. So no, Romanticism is extremely important, and I have over the years taken quite an interest in the way that it works in the formation of particular ideological systems, particular ideological formations, including Hindu nationalism. Of course, you will know this better than I. Now, is this okay? Right. Now, models and implications of cosmopolitanism, of course, it's, how can I even start answering a question like this? I mean, the thematic range of each of these two units, both the model and that of the implications, is so vast that the only answer you'll get from me now is something pretty simple and formulaic. To put it very simply, the proof of the pudding is in the eating, right? The proof of the pudding is in the eating. There is a certain model of cosmopolitanism which has been projected from a variety of European locations, but then, of course, matched elsewhere. There are many Arab cosmopolites as well, right? Who think that there is a particular template of thinking about society as an ongoing, progressive venture, right, open towards the future, and until very recently, still colored with a sizable dose of optimism, right? No longer, I must say, but it used to be, and it was guided over the period of over a century by quite a lot of optimism. That yes, boundaries may indeed get weaker and weaker. And then there was a resurgence of this idea at the beginning of when the issue of globalization became very prominent in the 1990s. Again, particularly liberals, people of sort of political liberals and economic liberals thought that now this is the moment where cosmopolitanism is actually going to be possible. But of course, if one were to look at Kant, it's an extremely complex and very nuanced view that he has on cosmopolitanism, and it evolved over time. Susan has said a couple of things about this earlier, and so I really don't know. I mean, it is not that there is a model of cosmopolitanism. Cosmopolitanism has always prevailed in points of advantage, right? From points of advantage. Always prevailed from points of advantage, right? I quoted quite deliberately Seneca, right? A Roman imperialist at the apogee of the Roman, writing at the apogee of the Roman Empire, finding that his own cosmopolitanism, right, opens the world for him, and then confines the accidents of birth, be it of Jews or of Greeks or of Syrians or other components of the empire, that these are things which, yes, I mean, they do persist, but then they cannot really disturb the reflexive calm that a cosmopolitan from the center might be able to exercise from that position of his. That is all I can say for the moment. I mean, this is something which we might take up in other at some other occasion, provided that we can identify the elements that we want to speak about a little bit more. So I had to waffle a little bit. AfD, well, you know, it's not only that. It's only, I'm British, you see, and I know many people in Britain who voted for Brexit. People of humble circumstance, of what the Germans like to call of migration background, right? No matter how many generations, they voted leave, and I said, why? We're being overpowered by all these immigrants coming in. I have heard this from many people of Turkish extraction, Arab extraction here in Germany who vote AfD. And they defend the AfD by saying that they are not really, except for a faction, they are not really against foreigners. They are against foreigners who make trouble, right? I mean, that is what I've heard really from more than one person. So I think it has to do again with it's a similar reaction to what people ascribe to some parts of Eastern Germany where people feel buffeted, right? People feel buffeted, they feel a little bit pushed, and that there are advantages being given to newcomers which are not being recycled sufficiently to people who have a greater right to be here. I mean, do you find this? Do you have any
different set of explanations as well? But I'll come back to that.
Yeah.
Susan.
I want to problematize the word romanticism because Rousseau is usually described as a romantic by everyone in the world, almost everyone in the world, except Immanuel Kant, who saw Rousseau as his most important inspiration. But that's a side note. Maybe we can talk about it over lunch. Aziz, I want to thank you for a wonderful talk. Also for writing me last week and basically asking, you know, how much censorship is there right now in Germany? Am I going to hurt the institution by talking about the gap between Enlightenment ideals and German policy on Israel-Palestine? I said, no, we've made our own trouble here, not to worry. But what interests me most, and it's another big question that I don't expect you to answer fully, but I'd just love to hear you riff for a little bit. Almost as in fact, more controversial in a certain sense than your remarks on October 7th are your remarks about the DDR being much more in line with the Enlightenment than let's say this side of the, well, this was, of course, East Germany some 30-some years ago. And I'd love to hear you just riff on that a little bit for a start, because I think you're absolutely right. It's not an accident that we're ending our Enlightenment celebration with a conference and a series of conferences on Paul Robeson.
Right. Well, I mean, I can say a couple of very straightforward things. One, of course, is that there are Marxists. Marxists. It's quite clear. I mean, Marxism is a particularly developed form of Enlightenment ideas.
But unfortunately, not, so I want you to riff on that because it's that view is so, unknown, controversial to so many people that I'd love to hear.
Yeah, honestly, I mean, I really don't see why it is controversial. I mean, I can judge why it might be politically made to be controversial. That is to say, it lacks political authority to assert itself. It lacks political authority to assert itself. And this is why it really makes it a subject of controversy, rather than something which, to my mind, is self-evident. And it ought to be, if one were to abstract oneself from political prejudices and preferences. Because the Marxism is a particularly, in some cases, acutely developed form of Enlightenment ideas and practices of the Jacobin type, I must say, right? And we cannot separate Jacobinism from the Enlightenment. That is one thing. And then one looks at policies. One looks at policies, for instance, regarding the family, women, right? Whereas there was, you know, a continuation of a certain form of Kinderkirche, Kücherkirche in the West. You had here a regime where nurseries were available from an early age, universally. Women were encouraged to work. So the positive aspect of social progress, which is implicit in ideas and practices that we ascribe to the Enlightenment, were part of state policy. Whereas at the other side, they were not part of state policy. In fact, state policy acted otherwise. It was socially very conservative in a way. Thirdly, the DDR, to a very large extent, purged Nazi elements from state administration, which did not happen in the West. And fourthly, and this I think is really very, very important, the treatment of the Holocaust, of the Shoah, had a very different coloration. It had a very different coloration. It had a coloration which was intermixed with reflections and analysis, historical analysis of precisely how these things might happen. What kind of antithesis existed between communism and Nazism, rather than this merger which then happened in the course of the Cold War, historical Streit and so on, be it in Germany or in the United States, famously in the United States. So this kind of conflation of historical registers did not occur, which to my mind betokens a far more clearer vision, not only of contemporary politics, but of the very recent past, which to my mind, that is to say, speaking of things that are mutable and that are historical, rather than sticking to the transcendental register, which is part of the Federal Republic's philo-Semitism, is I think these are quite clear. No, I mean.
They're very clear to me because I agree with every word you just said, but thank you for saying to people for whom it might not be so clear.
We have like 5 minutes and 4 questions, so please be very precise. First going with the mic. The person in the red vest.
Oh, down here.
Thanks. I'll make this very quick. I'll try and get a question out of it. I really just want to thank you for speaking up on behalf of my wife's Palestinian here living in Germany. So we have a very clear sense of how difficult it is to speak on these issues. My question would be very quickly: there is you trying to change the situation, trying to change the discourse in Germany. Is an appeal to reason going to be what helps, or is there going to need to be some kind of imaginative, emotional effort required on the part of the Palestinian or pro-Palestinian community here to dig into the history of why it is that Germans have this reason block? And I know perfectly well because these conversations always end in the phrase, "You're not German, you can't understand," and therefore you know that it's proving the point that you made. So are appeals to reason going to help, or is it just going to make the problem worse at the present time?
If we have 4 people, maybe we should collect 2 and 2.
Yeah, absolutely. Next is the person in the back. Yeah.
Thank you very much for a great talk in the history of philosophy.
Can you be a little bit louder?
My comment is just to say that I think part of the problem of the separation of Marxism from modernity or Enlightenment, some of that I think should be related to Engels in terms of the scientization of Marxism, which made many people think that German idealism literally ended, the Enlightenment in philosophy. And then it got worse with Althusser's, radical break of Marx, from Hegel, So when people teach, and I think this is very critical, when people teach the history of philosophy, Marxism is never taught as a continuation of the Enlightenment, but rather as something that is almost completely distinct from it, and I think that is part of the problem. And then the humanism and all that gets completely lost, and the connection to ancient philosophy through Hegel, gets completely submerged. So I think that's part of the problem.
Indeed. I do agree, and I entirely agree. Yeah.
Would you like to answer?
No. Collect.
You want to collect? Is it okay?
Are we collecting?
Then, Dr.
Are we collecting or are we answering?
I would say we collected 2. Would you
Yes.
Yes.
That's better. Yeah.
Yes.
We'll collect another 2.
Right. Will reason help? I don't know. I mean, but I'm in principle skeptical. I think just as this mood, this prevalent mood, this dominant mood in the German public sphere over the last now almost half a century, because it really did take time for the skip to catch on, right? It required very clearly political will and institutional engagement, that is to say, the engagement of the entire state apparatus at all levels, educational, otherwise, and so on. And I think that it is well enracinated, not only in people's minds, but also within the institutional workings that one finds in Germany, be they academic or political, or the various ministries, and now there will be new questions in nationality examinations on the history of Israel. You know, it's reason. No, this is a political. I mean, there are some people who are amenable to reason, not very many, but the upbringing has been of such intensity, really, and the matter has been handled with such intensity that it is that it's. I mean, it's a genuine part of people's dispositions, right? Affective dispositions, and it is fed every day, right? I mean, the process continues at all levels, in the press and television, schools, government decisions and pronouncements, and so on and so forth. There are there is a number of small-scale initiatives where people, mainly Palestinians, but others as well, are meeting with a broad band of Germans. They attract mostly people from the Linke, right?
Oh.
Yeah.
Way more complicated.
Yeah. No, but the people who are coming to the from the left. Yeah, not from the Linke. No, yeah, no.
Every single party
yeah.
has signed on to
Yeah.
the Gleichheit.
Yeah.
And you will find small groups of politicians in each party who think, wait, maybe this is a problem. But
I mean, including, incidentally, Gysi's sister, right, who participates in some of these meetings. So yes, but it remains a very isolated and patchy kind of effort. I don't think it has. I mean, it's a question of political will ultimately, and it's not only the will of parties or particular actors. It's the institutional will of the state ultimately.
I'll make this really quick. Science is a faculty is an inspiring statement for now, and I share your disdain for buzzwords, which is why I'm a little curious as to what you mean, and I may be reading this wrong, when you speak of certain affiliates, such as positivism or Freemasonry. Are these internal disagreements? I think that's a phrase that you bring up. Or are they different categories at different times? Or perhaps what's more important to ask, are some of their protagonists not entirely willing to talk to other protagonists? Thanks.
I'll stand here so that I can see.
Last question.
Neither nor. As a matter of fact, I mean, that was really an enumeration of particular movements for illustrative purposes, particular movements which did embody ideas, values, actions, and politics of what we think of what we understand as the Enlightenment over time. Positivism, and I mentioned two aspects of positivism, as a doctrine of science, knowledge, that is epistemology, and as a doctrine of history, that is to say, history as a process which passes through a number of stages until Enlightenment is reached at the end. And if we rely on Auguste Comte, then we have the positivist church, right? It's modeled on the Catholic Church. It's really curious, very curious. So it's a doctrine of history. It is a particular doctrine of history, which is very much in conformity with Enlightenment optimism and the notion of perfectibility over time, that things really do get better because people undergo two forms of improvement. One is cognitive and the other is normative, right? So it's superior, that is to say, an evolution of morals and an evolution of the capacity for knowledge. So to that extent, this is why I would include positivism as one of the actors in the history of the Enlightenment, what became. Freemasonry, particularly French Freemasonry, was basically an association of free-thinking people who would not otherwise have met in any normal social setting. And you will find that Freemasonry has also been very important in intellectual modernization in Turkey and in the Arab world. From the late 19th century, these were free-thinking people who got together, who belonged to social groups that would not normally mix, right? And that institutional entity afforded the emergence of a more cohesive body of intellectuals of different types of origins, right? Who then went on to produce some of the most interesting ideas that we have, yeah? And who were active in the press, and who were active in education, and so on and so forth. Not the British lodges, not the Scottish lodges, as a matter of fact, the French lodges. And there were both kinds, both in Turkey and in the Arab world.
Take the last question,
yes,
because we're running out of time.
Okay, first of all, thank you for your talk. I have a very short question, and maybe we can even discuss this during coffee break, but I want to come back what you said about Marxism and the GDR. I think it's, I completely agree, Marxism is a very advanced form of enlightenment, but there's theory and there's practice. And I think even with what you always said about childcare, women working, there are things that went horribly wrong in the GDR with all of that. And also, they may have kicked out people who had a Nazi past of the administration. The way they dealt with the Holocaust in public discourse, in my opinion, wasn't very effective. And I have a, maybe we could think about if, as you said, the GDR was much more enlightened, what happened? What went so horribly wrong? Because now, if you look at the polls, it's the people in East Germany who vote for the AfD.
Indeed.
This morning in the radio, there was the director of the KZ Buchenwald, and he gets murder threats, horrible murder threats. Mm. So it's, I'm a bit, yeah, I'm concerned.
Yes.
So
Can we talk about this later? Because really, I mean, that opens up another broad band of issues.
I think that's a nice way to go about it. I missed out on answering my question, asking my question, so I will use this reference to finish this part of today, and we have the next speaker in about 10 minutes. 10 minutes. Thank you so much.